thought killing him would be the end of the story. But the moment Jesus died, everything changed. The sky turned black, the earth shook, and the temple, the holiest place in all of Israel, was ripped open from top to bottom. These weren't symbols. They were real, supernatural events, witnessed by thousands. So, what really happened when Jesus died? Number to wrestle with. This curtain was so heavy and tightly woven, it would have taken dozens of men to move, yet no hands touched it. It tore from the top, from heaven downward, as if God himself was the one who did it. Was it a sign? Was heaven declaring that the separation was over, that the final sacrifice had been made once and for all? For centuries, humanity had been kept at a distance from the divine. But in a single moment, without a word, God opened a way. The barrier was broken, the old covenant fulfilled. A new era had begun. Number 8. A violent earthquake shook the land just as the temple veil tore. The earth responded. At the exact moment Jesus died, a powerful earthquake struck the region. Stones cracked. The ground trembled beneath the feet of soldiers, priests, and bystanders. Massive rocks split open. The foundations of buildings shifted. The city of Jerusalem, full of pilgrims for the Passover feast, was shaken, literally and spiritually. This wasn't an ordinary tremor. It wasn't part of a fault line or a weather event. It came out of nowhere. And at the precise second, Jesus breathed his last breath. Coincidence? Or creation itself mourning the death of its creator? Throughout the Old Testament, earthquakes were seen as a signature of divine presence. When God descended on Mount Sinai to speak with Moses, the mountain shook violently. When prophets spoke of God's judgment, they described the earth trembling in fear. So, what does it mean when the earth shakes at the death of one man? Some early Jewish writings mention an unexplained shaking around the time of the Crucifixion. Even Roman records describe a sudden darkness and violent disturbance over Jerusalem. But there's something even more mysterious. This wasn't the only earthquake connected to Jesus. Another would occur 3 days later, when something buried deep in a tomb would no longer stay there. We'll get to that. But for now, ask yourself this. But something felt different. He stood at the foot of the cross, commanding the detail that carried out Jesus' execution. He heard the mocking. He watched the suffering. He saw the sky turn black. He felt the earthquake beneath his feet. And then, he heard Jesus cry out, not in desperation, but in authority, "It is finished." Moments later, silence, and the centurion broke. Surely this man was a son of God. Those were his words, not a Jew, not a believer, not a follower, a Roman, a pagan, a killer. Suddenly convinced. What did he see that changed him so completely? He had likely overseen dozens of crucifixions, but he had never seen a man die like this, never seen nature itself respond, never seen heaven and earth aligned around a single death. Could a Roman executioner recognize something that many of the religious leaders refused to admit? And if he could see it, what does that mean for the rest of us? Number 5. The crowd reacted with fear and remorse. Just hours earlier, they had shouted with certainty, "Crucify him!" They mocked, they jeered, they watched with cold detachment as Jesus struggled to breathe. Many came just to witness the spectacle, a public execution during Passover, right outside the city gates. It was entertainment for the curious, a victory for the religious elite. But then something shifted. sun disappeared. The sky turned black. The ground trembled violently beneath their feet. The laughter stopped. The cheering turned to whispers. And suddenly, no one wanted to be there anymore. Luke's gospel tells us the crowd began to beat their chests, a traditional sign of grief, guilt, and deep sorrow. What had they just done? Who had they just crucified? Some ran. Some fell to their knees. Number 4. 3 hours of darkness in the middle of the day. At noon, when the sun should have been at its highest, shining bright over Jerusalem, everything went dark. Not for a moment, not during sunset, but for 3 full hours. From midday until 3 p.m., the land was cloaked in a deep, unnatural darkness. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't an eclipse. Because Passover always falls on a full moon, making a solar eclipse astronomically impossible. So what was it? Was it symbolic? Was it divine mourning? Or was it heaven's judgment being poured out in real time? Centuries earlier, the prophet Amos wrote something eerily similar. On that day, declares the Lord, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. Amos 8:9. Number 3, the final cry. It is finished. Jesus had been hanging on the cross for hours, bleeding, gasping for breath, surrounded by mockery, agony, and silence from heaven. But suddenly, with what little strength remained, he lifted his head and shouted, not in pain, not in defeat, but with absolute authority. It is finished. 3 words, and the world changed forever. He didn't whisper them. He declared them, loud enough to be heard by those standing nearby, and echoing through time for generations to come. But what exactly was finished? Was it his suffering? Was it the mission? Was it the ancient promise spoken by the prophets? Or was it something deeper? The scriptures say he gave up his spirit. He wasn't taken. His life wasn't stolen. He surrendered it willingly. Could any man choose the moment of his death? Could anyone declare the work of salvation complete? With a single breath. This wasn't the cry of a victim. It was the final word of a king who knew exactly what he came to do, and who did not leave a single part of it unfinished. Number 2, ancient prophecies fulfilled with precision. Centuries before Jesus was born, ancient prophets, in different eras, across different regions, wrote down mysterious promises about a coming Messiah. They spoke of someone who would suffer, be rejected, be pierced, and somehow, they all came true. In the final hours of Jesus' life, over 300 prophecies from the Old Testament, fulfilled by one man. Mathematicians have tried to calculate the odds. The probability of one person fulfilling even 8 of these prophecies is 1 in 100 trillion. So what are the odds of fulfilling over 300? It begs the question, was all of this a coincidence? Or was it a divine script written long before time, unfolding before the eyes of the world? Either Jesus was the most impossibly lucky man in history, or he was exactly who he claimed to be. Number 1, the testimony of eyewitnesses. You can deny rumors, you can question legends, but it's much harder to dismiss eyewitnesses, especially when they're willing to die for what they saw. After Jesus took his final breath, something happened that no one expected. His followers didn't scatter in fear. They rose with boldness. Fishermen became preachers. Tax collectors became martyrs. Skeptics became saints. Why? Because they saw something. Because they experienced something so real, so undeniable. They were willing to face torture, prison, and death rather than stay silent. And what's even more striking is this. The same men who fled when Jesus was arrested stood in front of crowds weeks later and declared, "You crucified him, but God raised him from the dead, and we are witnesses of this." They weren't selling a religion. They weren't building an empire. They were telling the truth, no matter the cost. Could you die for a lie? Would you give your life for something you made up? And yet, the movement they started hasn't stopped. It began with that moment at the cross, and it's still changing lives today. What happened when Jesus died was undeniable, but what happened after, in the days that followed, is even more mysterious. The signs didn't stop. The silence didn't last. Something was coming, and it would shake the world forever. If this moved you, you need to see what happened next. Click now.